And welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. On today's episode, we're going to talk about time as it relates to Pokemon, because time is one of those things I hear people talk about so often in a lot of their videos, but sadly, they do the same exact conversation every single time. They talk about time in Pokemon in that 10 year timeline, and they always seem to be talking about investing. And don't get me wrong, I've definitely, done that myself on this channel, and that's probably not the right thing to do. You shouldn't always talk about time in Pokemon in 5 to 10 years or 20 years and always talk about it as investability, because time is this weird thing in this hobby. I've seen a lot of people start to use time and maybe not realize what they're doing, but start to use time as like a measurement of distance. And that might sound really weird because you might be thinking of time in seconds or hours or months or years or just rotations around the sun, however you want to think about time. But I've seen a lot of people talking about time, or maybe I'm not hearing enough people talk about time in this way as a measure of distance. And when you think about time as a measure of distance in Pokemon, really what you're talking about is the distance of time between sets. And one of the things I see a lot of people talk about, which I think is a little concerning and probably something I hope a lot of people will change, is they talk about Pokemon and the distance between sets as being a negative. And they talk about like the Pokemon burnout and trying to keep up with all this stuff. And that is always very dangerous because I've talked about Pokemon as a marathon, again, as a distance of time. Because if you think about Pokemon as a marathon, that means you can't just sprint to the finish, because realistically with Pokemon, there is no finish. It's just imaginary distance away where you're just going to constantly have to continue to grind. But where I'm looking at time as a distance of measurement is, you know, how many sets are released? What is your comfort level? Where do you see this hobby going for you? Because right now, for a lot of people out there, when you think about time and distance, really for Pokemon, for a lot of people, it's like in the last 2 years, or might as well just call it the Sword and Shield era. So when you think Sword and Shield, really you're not going too far back past, you know, Sword and Shield base, Rebel Clash, Darkness Ablaze, Vivid Voltage. Sure, you could throw in the specialty sets, Champion's Path or Shine and Fates or Battle Styles or Chill and Rain, Evolutions. You could just go on and on. But when I think about Pokemon as a distance of time and a distant and as a measurement of distance, I think about a lot of people, how they just can't like comprehend how long this hobby truly is. And when people talk, and I hear it on other channels, and kind of at the beginning of this channel or beginning of this video, I talked about, you know, the one thing everybody talks about is that 5 to 10 year timeline when you're talking about strictly the investability of Pokemon. And I always get nervous when I hear people saying that, because 5 to 10 years in this hobby, when you look at it, just sit back and look at the entire timeline of Pokemon. Really, for us, probably most of the people watching this channel, our entire timeline in the Pokemon TCG is 1999 to present. Sure, you could talk about Japanese cards and go back a little bit further, but for us, a lot of the English listeners out there, it really starts at 99. It starts at base set. Now, the one thing different when you talk about going back that far, when you talk about base set, jungle, fossil, those were the sets people were really in. Maybe you could talk about a little bit more of that distance, go towards, Team Rocket or base set 2 or Gym Heroes, Gym Challenge or the Neos, or, not a lot of people made it to the e-reader. So really, it's just this small area. But the thing is, and the big drastic difference there is when people left Pokemon, it was a short window of time. And the reason why they left Pokemon wasn't like what people are leaving Pokemon for today. I think what's happened when the people that are leaving Pokemon are just getting burned out financially. Back in the 99 timeline, it was a lot of people leaving Pokemon just because they got older. Because really, when you think about Pokemon, and people talk about it all the time as being a children's card game, while maybe that's how it started off as a children's card game, but it's definitely evolved into something drastically different than that. And there's a million different examples throughout this hobby how it has definitely transcended a children's card game. But in 99, 2000 timeline, that's really what it was. And that's why some of the people that stuck with it, and you look at some of the super hyper successful people in this hobby, and sure you could talk about like, King Pokemon and his Charizard collection, or Birdman and all the original, cards he graded, and some of the early sets they opened. Those guys were cracking booster box left and right. When you talk about those type of guys and how hyper successful they were in the hobby, it was more about just timing the hobby, right? And it was timing it in a weird way because they were timing it where there was very little demand, or at least whatever demand there was, it really changed from like that collector mindset to, probably in the early 2000s, it definitely became more of a player base and not as much as the collector base. And then that brings us to a lot of the conversation people have when they talk about time, and they talk about time in the hobby versus timing the hobby. So what does that mean? It just means how long are you in the hobby for? Because time in the hobby will often be very successful. And the reason why people talk about stuff like that is because they just look at the past 20 years. And I understand why people do that. But that's like this super dangerous game people are playing when they talk about, time in the hobby versus timing the hobby. And a lot of that reason is because when you look at Pokemon, and really you got to kind of pull yourself back a little bit. And I look at Pokemon for like the last 10 years. So let's call it from 2012 to 2022. One of the things I noticed that happened in the hobby during that time was true organic demand, which was created. And what this true organic demand was, people trickling back into the hobby, rediscovering Pokemon, and everybody's going to have a different timeline of how long it's going to take people to start rediscovering Pokemon. And a lot of that is going to be dependent on age. And during that last 10-year timeline, that organic demand really started to ramp up. And then there was that huge catalyst, sure, 2020, the Logan Paul hype and everything that came with it. But there was this organic demand continuing to trickle into the hobby. Because like I talked about earlier, when in 99, the reason people moved out of Pokemon is because they grew up and they just got too old for it. But now, one of the things about Pokemon was definitely one of the hardest things, a couple years ago for myself was, and I've talked about this before on other videos, is as a collector, I had to sort of live in the shadows. And when I originally started this channel, yes, it came out of the quarantine time because I was bored. But even at the beginning, I was still afraid to show my face, afraid to really, be out there with full transparency. And yes, that full transparency is my face and being out there and talking to a camera directly, opposed to just hiding behind a video and having memes flash across the channel. And one of the big things about that is because, Pokemon, while for this group of listeners watching this, and whoever's going to watch this video real time during the live or after the fact, Pokemon has definitely now changed and adapted to be this more socially acceptable thing. And I think when you talk about, the future of this hobby and the time of the hobby and people rediscovering, that social acceptability is huge for this hobby, whether people want to admit that or not. It is definitely huge. And when I talk about the social acceptability, sadly, which a lot of people don't want to point to this, but it's probably one of the biggest catalysts that makes it, Pokemon more socially acceptable for a lot of people, is the dollar amounts. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, and I don't really even like to say that, but it really boils down to it. Is as Pokemon has now started to make headlines with, the $420,000 Charizard, whether I don't even know if that was actually a confirmed sale. And then, the Illustrator Pikachu sold for $900,000, but then, that didn't get paid for, but it's still sold for $720,000. But it doesn't matter. Like for us, sure. The people watching this video in our small group, sure, it makes sense to debate those prices and, say, well, what was really paid, what wasn't really actually paid. But for the average person, for average Joe Smo who never thinks about Pokemon maybe more than once or twice a year, or if they do hear about it, it's because, the news picked it up, or Yahoo News or CNN or Fox or whatever people watch, because that's what they're talking about on the news. So then people start putting eyes to it, and it becomes this very socially acceptable thing. And as that happens, and the social acceptability that, comes with Pokemon becomes more and more rampant, which I think we're still just at the very early stages of that. And sure, people love to flock to the social aspect of Pokemon and hear first things like the negative. They'll hear about more recent news, like people going and getting in fights at Target or Walmart in the parking lot, or people going into McDonald's and buying out all the Happy Meals and stuff. And like, this is the stuff, people who are not super engaged in the hobby will hear. These will be the things that maybe somebody will talk about. And sadly, channels like mine, other channels out there, that was one of the things we covered. We covered like the scalping of Pokemon and, the McDonald's packs and all the hype and everything, because, that's what we do, because we're talking about it, because it's an active conversation in the hobby during that time. So is there a little bit of like negative that comes with that social acceptability? Yes. But like I said, that driving factor is the price. And as that price continues to drive and the social acceptability becomes more and more, you're going to see more and more people start to really come out of the weeds and sort of really like say, yes, I'm fine to admit that I actually do enjoy Pokemon. Pokemon is something that I'm gonna sneeze. Well, is Professor Oak in the chat? I think I saved that sneeze. But this is gonna be like one of those things, but it's gonna take time. And so when I talk about the title of this video is time relative to Pokemon, it's just that. It's the longer Pokemon goes on, the longer these news articles happen, the longer people are willing to kind of come out of the shadows or come out of the weeds and make their, love of Pokemon like more noticeable. It's going to be huge. But also, when you talk about time relative to Pokemon, is age gaps, age generations of collectors, like sure, I've looked at the analytics on some of my videos. The majority of the collectors in this hobby fall within that, 26 to 34 year age group. So yeah, that only really fills up WotC. You're looking at WotC from 99 to 2003. Sure, you could throw in some of the early e-reader sets, but it's a very small window. When you talk about time relative to Pokemon, you're going to have these later generations of collectors who we don't really even think about right now as being like, big buyers. These people are going to start trickling into the hobby the same way most of the people out there watching this video did. As you came of age, as you came into your income earning, and all this time that went by, this is when you went into the hobby. But there will be a little lag time. Think about all the kids that were buying, late e-reader sets as a kid, or diamond and pearl packs, or platinum series, or, we could even go a little, like a little bit further to black and white, or maybe a little bit earlier than that to like heart, gold, soul, silver. That timeline of collectors, the people that were really truly opening up packs during, heart, gold, soul, silver, they're probably not quite there yet, because they might just need a little bit more time. And when that group comes in, and there's this big time factor of Pokemon, and this is one of those questions that, like, I wouldn't say it keeps me up at night, but it's definitely a question that I ponder more than anything else. And the question that I ponder most is when you think about Pokemon and you think about 2020, 2021, and 2022, the one word that comes to everybody's mind is bubble. Pokemon is in a bubble. And sure, there's definitely a lot of things in Pokemon that I would agree with is in a bubble. Certain cards, certain sets, yes, I could totally understand that argument. But when you pull yourself back and you look at Pokemon as a whole, and you look at some recent sales for some stuff, you go, man, this is a really hard bubble, because you're continuing to see buying demand, especially on the very high end, especially when you're talking about, super scarce cards, super in demand cards, trophy cards, stuff like that. The demand is there. High graded, high price stuff, the demand is there. So while, yes, some stuff is in a bubble, I think the entire hobby is not. So that question that keeps me up at night and really makes me question is, what if in 10 years from now, or 15 or 20 years from now, people look back to today, look back at the 2020 hype, and I wonder if people will look back and say, man, I should have bought more. because I feel like people could have multiple conversations here. Maybe everything will have crashed and burned, and everybody will look back on the hype that was Pokemon and say, I shouldn't have bought anything. I can't believe how everything crashed. But that's not what keeps me up at night. That is actually, like, as sad as it is to say, more reassuring that people would just say everything is kind of worthless, because then that means we are able to really recognize we're in a bubble. But what keeps me up at night is that question of, if people are going to look back at this time and think, wow, I should have bought more. Oh my God, look at what sealed product from 2020, 2021. Look at what it's selling for now. And maybe people will go back, maybe the same way we kind of think about base set is like, man, I wish I kind of like never opened a base set pack as a kid, because think of how much all the packs I opened as a kid would be worth. But at the same time, it's like, you can't really make that argument because you had that pack opening experience, because you put those cards in your binders, or you played with them at Toys R Us, or you did whatever you did, like you grew that bond to it. So that's not really like a super fair argument. But I wonder if people will look back at this time and say, oh my God, there was so many opportunities that like I should have taken more advantage of, because you really don't know, right? And I think that is the argument, or that is the question of this video, is that time. What is time going to prove, or what is time going to dictate? Because I've mentioned in other videos, the only person in the history of the world that is undefeated is Father Time. Father Time is going to outlive us all. And, like, what's going to happen in the future when, we get older and we start to die, and, our collections start getting liquidated? There's people like Gary King Pokemon. In 20 years from now, how old is he going to be then? People have talked about his storage unit, like potentially if that ever got public, or people, they don't even want people to see what he has. And I don't know, because I've never seen it, and I don't really know anybody that knows the full contents, but people have made whispers that if his, storage unit ever got out, it would kill the market for a lot of different sets, a lot of different cards. So, you know, what's to say, like, when TCA, lives to be 100, if he passes away, like, what are his cards going to do when it hits the market, or is there going to be a market in the future? But it's a good conversation to have, right? It's like, it's definitely an important conversation to have when you think about Pokemon, to think about Pokemon as a unit of distance, and as just, how far can we go in Pokemon? How far can we go out? When you go far enough out of sets, when does prices, and I hate to say it, when do prices have to either do one of two things, increase or decrease? And I think a lot of, the arguments people say is, you can see Pokemon potentially flatline for, an extended period of time. And while there can be truth to that, it is very hard to make that argument when you go back and you start to look at Pokemon in longer timelines. And when I say longer, again, it's using time as a distance of, as like a measurement of distance, because people will say, yes, during the XY era, maybe there was a little flat line, but then people won't obviously look at the obvious ones like Flash Fire, which always had a gradual increase. But people say, look at XY, look at this long flat line that a lot of these sets did. Or they'll look at Sun and Moon and they'll say, look at what Crimson Invasion did. Or they'll look at the end of XY and say, well, think of the last three sets of XY. What did they do? Like Fates Collide and Steam Siege and Evolutions. Like, they flatlined for years. And again, it will be like a 4 or 5 year timeline. That will be the unit of distance they use. But then you'll hear, like, Cool Trainer Ryan, who is on this channel, when him and PokeRev went out and bought they bought a whole storage unit, but one of the things they bought, or a card store, I should say, but one of the things they bought during that was a sealed case of Dragon Frontiers. And how did they price each one of those booster boxes? And keep in mind, this was pre-Logan Paul hype. Each one of those booster boxes in that sealed case of 6, they priced each booster box at $8,000. So this, it's so hard, because when you look at when they bought that case, whether it was like, I forget if it was 2018 or 2019, but this is pre-Logan Paul hype. When you have Dragon Frontiers booster box priced for $8,000 a piece, sure, you could look at Dragon Frontiers booster boxes now, and they're double that price. But back then, it's like, well, how far out in 2009 or 2019, how far out was really Dragon Frontiers? Dragon Frontiers was the last set of like the EX series. So is there like this huge, massive, timeline in between it? It's like, okay, well, during that time, you had 2018, 2019, you just came out of XY. You were into Sun and Moon a little bit. You're getting ready to get towards the end of Sun and Moon in 2018. So I guess you're actually like, it's just crazy to think about, right? It's this weird window of time where people only want to make the arguments for what works for their conversation. But then you could pull yourself back even farther and you say, well, let's put ourselves now in 2006. Well, what were, base set packs selling for in 2006? Well, base set packs were pretty cheap back then. You could get base set packs for almost nothing. But like, this is that weird argument. It's that weird argument of, the reason why those packs, in my opinion, were so low was because of what I said earlier, is the generation of collectors who were buying that stuff just happened to be in this weird timeline where they weren't back into this hobby. Now that this timeline of collectors is back in this hobby, I just personally, when I look at the future and I look at time and I look at distance between sets and things like this, I don't see that sort of exodus happening. Now, can there still be an exodus? Of course. You think about all the kids nowadays that are opening packs, and I know a lot of people out there think that there are no kids opening packs, that the only people opening packs right now are like, the 34-year-olds who are just, looking at Pokemon as an investable asset and, all the hype and everything. But that's just not the truth either. There is this younger generation that's still buying packs, still opening packs, and the hype right now is still strong. And I think we're just going to continue to see this like weird generational curve. And I think we're going to be able to time it relatively easy. That yes, the 8 and 9-year-olds might not find Pokemon cool when they're 13 or 14 in middle school, getting ready to go into freshman year of high school. I think that is going to constantly be this like revolving door of collectors at that younger generation. But what I see happening when I think about Pokemon as this measurement of time and distance is that all these collectors that are re-entering and start, and I guess in a way you can call Pokemon of coming to age, right? And that comes to that social acceptability and everything, or coming to age where you're able to now, accept Pokemon again, where you could accept it as a kid and then you grew out of it and then you get to accept it again. But as this revolving door, starts to open up and people start to re-enter, and they're going to stick around for a lot of them. Not everyone. There's always going to be an exodus at all levels. But the people that continue to enter, and and I've talked about this in one of my last videos, is there's this core group of collectors or this core group of hobbyists. And as that core group grows, which it will, because it's not a closed door type of hobby, if you want to be in the core group of collectors, like, you're welcome. Come on in, join the party. It's fun. The water's fine. But as that core group continues to grow and continues to get larger and larger, what's going to happen now to like the truly rare, the truly scarce stuff, like the stuff that is truly hard to come by, that doesn't have just like insane populations of cards? What happens to those truly hard to find, low population cards? If you have a true hardcore group of collectors and investors, given enough time, and that pool of people just continues to grow and grow and grow, and people want to start like really making their sets the best they can be. And a lot of the times when you talk about sets being the best they can, eventually you're going to have a group of that hardcore collector look at condition rarity and stuff like this. And when you start to look at, PSA 10 populations of certain cards, or even like WotC first edition, or yes, Skyridge. Everybody out there, take a shot if you're doing the drinking game of this channel. But like, if you look at sets like that, cards in those sets, and you're like, man, there's only like 50 or 100 of some of these cards in these really high grades. And this core group of collectors is continuing to get larger and larger and more massive. It's like, how will you ever be able to quench the demand of that super hardcore group of people? And if you can't quench, their thirst or their demand for a lot of this stuff is really going to have no. And when I talk about stuff, I'm talking about like Pokemon products, cards, sealed product. It's really going to only have one trajectory, and that's got to be up in investability. So when I think people look at, and there's a million of those videos where people will just look at any sealed product or any Pokemon product, and they'll just say, this is investable in 5 years, 10 years, and like, here's why. That's one thing they don't ever really talk about, is that if that core group just continues to grow, like, and not willing to sell, prices increase. Now, the problem is this oversaturation. And I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of when they look at Pokemon and they look at distance between sets and they don't see like potential growth for this stuff. They say, no matter how many sets are in between battle styles, a lot of people out there will go to the grave saying, I think battle styles is not going to be investable and that we'll see it at $80, forever. And that's what a lot of people will say. And I understand that argument too. Like me personally, when I look at a battle styles or a chill and rain at these super low prices, I look at these as having, gradual upward trajectories, like especially when it comes to the investability of this stuff, because I think like the demand will continue to be strong. But more importantly, I don't see a lot of this stuff like flooding the market every single time it hits a certain price point. And if it doesn't just flood the market every time it hits a certain price point, like that's what's going to help the prices continue to go up. And maybe it's not a great example, but when you think about like some products where like I don't like to ever compare like a chill and rain to a base set booster box because obviously they're so drastically different. But when I look at something like the base set booster box, while I don't compare the two, they're drastically different. I do look at the selling pressure of, say, a base set booster box or a jungle booster box or fossil. Because when you look at the hype, which was 2020, 2021, and you think about how many of those booster boxes actually truly exist out there. When you think about base set, you could be talking about thousands upon thousands upon thousands of booster box existed. And when we saw base set booster box prices creep up to $30,000, I thought to myself during that time, I said, this is the moment. This will be the moment where every single person who was sitting on a base set booster box and that sale of $30,000 for an unlimited base set box happened. I was like, this is it. This will be the moment where somebody just opens up the floodgates and every single base set booster box that exists is going to all hit the market at one time, and base set prices are going to just absolutely disintegrate overnight. And that never happened. And so like when I think about that, I think of like, okay, there's all these thousands of base set booster boxes out there that exist. And prices finally hit $30,000. If people weren't comfortable selling that at $30,000 and now prices have retraced back to like 15,000, and because you got to keep in mind the people that had big supplies of base set booster boxes had been sitting on those for a while. It wasn't like every single person who owned a booster box of base set bought it in 2020. That's not the case. So I look at something like that and I say, okay, if a price tag of 30,000 wasn't enough to literally shake every single one of these booster boxes out of people's collections, what prices are? Because now you got to look at a lot of those people who have very large positions in base set, sealed product, acquired that position over multiple years and acquired it at a time when Pokemon was, relatively speaking, in comparison today, very low. So price points are extremely low for a lot of this stuff. So if they weren't really selling it at 30,000 and they continue to hold on to it, Could you then use that thought process when you look at a chill and rain booster box? And again, I don't like comparing the two because I think it's such a drastic, different product, different amount of product. Not every single person is sitting on multiple booster boxes of, base set, and probably a lot more people are sitting on booster boxes of chill and rain. Yes. But this is a huge but. But with that thought process in mind, if you couldn't shake, base set boxes out of people's hands for $30,000, what's it going to take to start shaking loose all these chill and rain booster boxes out of people's hands? And sure, is there probably going to be a very decent amount of people that as soon as chill and rain booster boxes hit like the stupid prices some people bought in at, keep in mind, and I think people forget this, I acquired my positions in chill and rain at $80, but there was a lot of people out there who was still buying chill and rain at release for 120, 130, 140 at one point. Like, when we start to creep up, when somebody who bought a chill and rain booster box at 130, and who knows how long, if ever, chill and rain makes it back to 130. But if somebody bought a booster box of chill and rain and they sat on it and the prices went all the way down to 80, and then they sat on that thing long enough for however long, or how many years or months or decades it takes for a chill and rain to hit 130 again. But when it hits 130, is that person who is now just sat on that single booster box, rode it all the way down and rode it all the way back up? As soon as it hits the 130, is this going to be the moment where they're like, finally, now I will sell it and break even and make no money? You got to think about some of this stuff, because that's just this time now. It's like they've held on to it for all this time. Why would that break even price be their time they want to sell? And when you think about that, it's very interesting when you think about investability of Pokemon. Now, what could potentially happen is, because prices have retraced for products like a chill and rain, and it's settled at that $80 for such a long amount of time. And when, again, I'm using the word long amount of time, referring to a set that just came out last year. So it hasn't really been that long of a time. And that's like the hard thing. And I just caught myself doing it right then. When you talk about Pokemon, we're constantly talking about Pokemon as a unit of time and a unit of distance. We've talked about now chill and rain being, bottom out at $80 for a long time. But when you think about it, when you think about the lifespan of a set, lifespan of a set is maybe 2 years. And then what happens? It goes out of rotation, and very rarely do you see reprints. And sure, there will always be the outliers like your Ultra Prisms and your Evolutions and stuff like that. There is always that outlier, or your Sun and Moon base ETBs and all that stuff. But even that, when you think about it in like a timeline, it's like, how long can this stuff stay low? If that core group of collectors, that core group of investors continues to grow. Now, this is the dangerous thing, and this is the thing that's important, is when we talk about Pokemon and we talk about time, how long does that core group stick around for? When you talk about Pokemon and talking about it as a unit of distance, and you talk about Pokemon as being a marathon, how long does all those people stick around for? And I think that is like that just $1,000,000,000,000,000 question. And I don't think there is any like sort of easy answer for any of this stuff. I don't think it's just like every single person is going to do exactly the same. Sadly, it's going to boil down to just an individual person by person basis. And I think that is the hardest thing to time. That is that is the hardest thing to make, rational arguments for, because the truth is this hobby is so amazingly diverse, from, the type of collectors, investors, hobbyists, players, however you want to look at this group of people. And then to go like another step further, it's like when you talk about people's financials, like positions and stuff like that, it's like everybody's finances are different. It's just so hard to look at Pokemon and try to go into the future standing at where we are at today. And again, I understand why, and I do it too, while people will look at literally the entire history of Pokemon. And it's a good argument because it's the true argument. You can make the argument of why it might not be the same in the future, but when you look at Pokemon and you say, why is it such a strong argument when you talk about Pokemon as being investable, when you'll hear people say you can literally look at every single major expansion or specialty set Pokemon has ever made? Given enough time, every single set has gone up. And it is hard to, argue that fact, because when you think about it, it is the most truest thing you can say, with the exception of stuff that, again, that is like still in print. And again, with that argument of what happened if we never went through, the shutdowns and the pandemics of the 2020s, like, and that's a great question a lot of people ask. It's like, well, what would have happened if that never happened? If you take away everybody being locked inside and, some people getting stimulus money and, paycheck protection loans for their businesses and, not going out and spending money on going out to dinner because everybody was locked in. Well, what would happen if that never happened? Would people still have entered the hobby or remove Logan Paul? What would have happened if Logan Paul never came in? And all these are great questions. And that's the thing. In my opinion, I still see Pokemon, having a very substantial increase, even without all that stuff happening. Would it have happened as big and as large as it was? No. But I still saw pre-pandemic, pre-Logan Paul, I still saw this huge amount of organic growth happening in this hobby, where prices were increasing on their own. Yes, there were definitely some products at the time which were still low, but a lot of those products, the reason why a lot of the prices were low, when you look at like a Burning Shadows booster box, like that's something that comes to my mind right away when you think about like 2019. This stuff was still available at distribution. And anytime you talk about sets and you talk about that time and distance between, it's so, so important that people talk about what is and what is not available at distributors. Because I've always find like the one argument people will always seem to pull out is they'll literally like say, here's a list of what was available at distribution at whatever time. They'll point at like some old distribution, and I guess we're calling it old again, time, old distribution list from 2018 or 2019 and say, look at all the sets that were available. But then you'll have like, an outlier like Phantom Forces or something, or, XY base or one of those snuck on. And you got like, okay, well, Phantom Forces in 2019, how much was a Phantom Forces booster box? It's like, holy shit, that's a really expensive booster box, even though you could kind of still technically pick it up at distributor level once in a while. It's like, well, we're just going to literally ignore this. And that will be it, right? It will all be about cherry picking. We're going to cherry pick like because this was available, or we're going to cherry pick because this were available. And it's like, well, now we've agreed that things that are available from distributors usually are lower price, and thus the market reflects that. Now, can we just look at every other product that is not available at distributor? Like, what are the prices of everything that is not available? And then people will be like, well, every single possible thing that wasn't available did increase in price. So it's this very tough like conversation to have. And it's I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for it. I think the only way you can really like talk about Pokemon and talk about time is to talk about everything, because we don't know. And that's what videos like this and conversations and, as much as I dislike them, the top 10 best investments or top 20 best investments, and everybody says, well, I think these will be good in 5 years, 10 years. While I hate those videos because I think a lot of that is, closing your eyes and just, you know, throwing a dart at something and hoping it sticks, because you could just, you know, use that argument for every product in the past as an excuse. And I saw a video just the other day, shout out to, who was it? I think it was Bulba Squad made a video where he did like a critique video of somebody else's video. And it's very interesting, like some of the products that person was saying in their video. And it was like, man, if I ever made a top 5 list, like I would never have picked some of the things he was picking, you know, like I think he used like Fates Collide single pack blisters as being a great investment. And then it was just like really weird stuff that I guess could potentially be investable in the future, but like I can't get behind some of this stuff, because I think what it boils down to is everybody is going to be extremely like opinionated when it comes to a lot of stuff in this hobby. And I think that's a good thing, right? To be opinionated, because not everybody's opinions are going to be right. I am very bearish as a whole when it comes to modern product. While I think modern product will have returns in the future, I'm still very bearish to it. And the reason towards modern, and I like to go towards vintage, just because I look at, rarity and scarcity of products. But I could be totally wrong, because I can't predict the future. I could, use whatever resources are available to me and try to predict it and do my best and make educated decisions. But I don't know if I'm going to be right about modern. I could be extremely wrong when I say I am very bearish towards modern, and it could have the complete opposite effect, because one thing modern has proven to do to me time after time after time is have extremely crazy single prices, extremely strong demand for a lot of modern product. Like I think about Sword and Shield based booster boxes, or Rebel Clash booster boxes, or Darkness Ablaze, or Vivid Voltage, booster boxes that still were able to hold premiums. Or I look at what Evolving Skies did. Evolving Skies, do I think it's still going to get a reprint in the very near term? Yes. But is it a very short window? Like, if Evolving Skies does get a reprint, is that probably going to be the last reprint of Evolving Skies? I would say that is a good likelihood that it would be the last reprint, but who knows? Maybe they have 2 more reprints of Evolving Skies in the future. But one of the things like that modern does do, and continues to prove me wrong, is prices for modern continue to sell for an extreme premium where I think the prices should be. When I look at, a lot of the chase cards and alternative arts, but this is where I could be wrong, because then when I have to think about it, because I try my best, I try to rationalize, I try to justify, and I try to think of timeline. And I try to think of like, while these cards are, very plentiful, because there's a lot of stuff being open, a lot of product being open. And, you could look at eBay at the time of a set and look at like eBay and look at, sales ending soonest. And it will be literally like whatever the most recent set is will be a large majority of the stuff that's selling. And again, that's because we're always living in the now. So the timeline then just gets like so super condensed, super short, where like that's all we can see. And yeah, why do I not really like singles? Because of like probably just like my personal struggles of I can't ever get to the point of justifying prices, because I'm constantly saying, well, I could buy this modern card, or I could buy all this vintage cards because I think this vintage card is undervalued. But I could be totally wrong, because the reason why that vintage card is undervalued is probably because there's just not as much demand for that card. Where for this modern card, there is the demand. And somebody had put a great comment on one of my other videos is, the true driving factor of Pokemon is demand. That is, and whoever wrote that comment was 100% right. And there's never been a more true comment ever written on one of my videos, is because he's right. When you really talk about Pokemon, it is all about demand. Demand will drive prices. And whether or not I personally think that there's a lot of product for Modern out there does not change the fact that if the demand is still greater than the supply, prices will increase. That's just a simple, economics 101. Like, if demand is greater than supply, prices go up. Like, there you go. You just saved yourself an entire econ class. Like, congrats. But if that's the case and the demand for Modern continues to grow, where while there is like this demand now and prices are what I say are overinflated, I could totally be wrong. I could be 100% wrong, where prices just continue to increase. And when you look at like a Umbreon alternative art card, like, and somebody wants to make the argument of, well, I think that alternative art card is going to be $1,000 card in the future. And then I say to them, like, I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because I think there's just going to be too many out there, and I don't think there's going to be demand. And somebody could just easily come back to me and say, no, you are wrong, because the pull rates for that Umbreon alternative art is fucking next to impossible for the average person. Next to impossible, meaning that you would have to open up so much product that it's not worth it to open that card. So you're not going to get the return from just opening packs. You're going to have to pick that card up on the secondary market to really justify buying it. And then if somebody's like, well, that's the chase card of the set, I think in the future, people are going to look back at that set as being one of the greatest sets of Modern, which I personally think it's going to be Brilliant Stars, but whatever, semantics. They tell me that's going to be the greatest set of this era. And when people look back on Sword and Shield and they look back on all the sets, and, it's like, maybe there'll be a collection video in the future when people are like, the top 5 best cards of the entire Sword and Shield era. And they're saying, alternative art Umbreon, that made it on the top 5. And then they show the price on the screen and it's $1,000. And I was just wrong. Like, that also can be very true. That is why the time of Pokemon and the history of Pokemon and the future of Pokemon, while it blends together, it is very distinctively different. And I don't know in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now who's going to be around or who's going to stick around, or maybe I'll be gone. I don't know. I can't say I think I'll be around. I think in 5 years from now I'll be around. I think in 10 years from now, and I hope in 10, 20 years from now. But like, if I'm not, who's to say that those cards are not going to be like some of the most valuable cards in all of Pokemon? And when people say, well, why are those cards the most valuable? And then people say, Pokeknowledge, do you not remember 2020? And then I'll have to think back and I'll say, well, yeah, I do remember 2020. And they'll say, do you not remember how many people flooded into the hobby at that time? And I'll be like, well, I remember how many people flooded in. And they'll be like, and all those fucking people stuck around. And they wanted the most, they wanted the chase card of that era because they grew an emotional attachment to those sets. So even though you might like level X cards because you think level X cards are undervalued, people never cared about level X. They stuck with Modern for now and for the next 10 years. But when they always look back at their chase card, they didn't care about stuff you cared about. They cared about what excited them when they got back into the hobby in 2020. So it's this weird balancing act, this weird internal debate, this weird internal conversation it's a never-ending thing. I mean, no one has a time machine. No one could just, go 10 years into the future and come back, with the almanac of Pokemon. Shout out to Back to the Future. But it's just, we can't do that. I think the conversation is good. I think the debate is good. I think the questioning everything is fantastic. I think that's what I hope channels like this can do. I hope there's a lot of other channels out there doing, similar stuff. But then there's the other channels who are just doing the top 5, top 10 lists and telling you why Pokemon is just this to the moon and it can't fail thing. I think it's a balancing act, right? It's that balancing act of obviously Pokemon could fail. And this balancing act of I really believe Pokemon could be successful. But who really knows? And I could think back, and this is the thing too, is it's like you tried to argue against it. And I argue against it and I look at things that I consider super modern. When I think about just the last couple sets of, Sun and Moon, and I think about Unified Minds or Unbroken Bonds or Team Up or Cosmic Eclipse, I'm like, Jesus, these are super recent sets. God damn it, every single product is just doing fantastic. When I look at a booster box of or not even a booster, if I look at an ETB, a Cosmic Eclipse, it's like, how much is that fucking thing selling for? Or if I look at a Team Up Check Lane blisters with the awesome Pikachu and Mimikyu artwork, I'm just like, how much is that goddamn thing selling for? A 3-pack blister, Cosmic Eclipse that got a Celebi art on it. I'm like, man, that Celebi art 3-pack blister. Wish I bought more of those. Or, a Unified Minds booster box, or an Unbroken Bonds booster box, or a Team Up, obviously Team Up booster box, or Team Up ETB, and I'm just like, damn, was I that wrong? Like, why didn't I just go crazy on that stuff? It's the reason I didn't go crazy on that stuff is because the conversation we're having right now with all this modern stuff is the same conversation that was still being had in, November of, 2019 when Cosmic Eclipse was released. In November 2019, if you were to say, I think I need to go all out and buy every single ETB of Cosmic Eclipse because this thing is going to be worth, tons of money in the future, people would have said, you are freaking insane. Or if you were to say when Team Up came out, it's just like, you know what? I'm just going to buy cases and cases of Team Up booster boxes because I think everybody's going to want them in 2-3 years. People will look at you like you were nuts. Nobody was doing that. Maybe some people were to a small scale, but not like this definitive, this is definitely going to happen kind of thing. And then it's that weird thing, right? And then I don't know the answer. I think that's the hardest thing. It's when you look back and it's like, well, the hype came in and printing capabilities and the pandemic and printer shut down and stuff. And it's like, yeah, but did that really matter? Or when I look at, like a XY base booster box, which XY base is still a relatively new product in a way, like it's still part of the XY era. And I'm just like, how much money is an XY base set booster box? And that doesn't make any sense. None of these prices make any sense for any of this stuff. It's just like, oh God. Can anything repeat itself? Or is that the question too? It's like, when you look at Sword and Shield and you look at super modern stuff, or just look at anything from distributor level right now, and you ask the question, it's just like, it's only going to take one product at these prices. When you compare it to a Team Up booster box, it's just like, it's only going to take one Sword and Shield product to do fantastic. Is that one Sword and Shield product going to be Evolving Skies? Is that one Sword and Shield product going to be Brilliant Stars? Like my money would be, it would be a Brilliant Stars. Like that's where I would put my guess to. But then it's like, or is it never repeatable? And I think that's the question too that everyone always asks. It's like, is it literally impossible for to have a repeat of what products have done in the last 4 years? Go back to Cosmic Eclipse. It only brings you back 3 years ago. Or Team Up. It's like, can any product in the Sun and Moon block, can any of them reprint, or not reprint, can repeat what those have done? And it's like, maybe. But is it the problem that when we think about Pokemon and we think about it as time, and we think about time as a unit of distance and that distance between sets, are we incapable as collectors, investors, as rational thinkers, as people that care about this hobby, that are studies, as students of this hobby, are we ill-equipped, just from a mental capability to ever say that things can be investable for modern in the now, like living in the moment? Is there any way to truly predict that? And the answer will always, 100% of the time, always be no to that question, because we can never definitively in the moment predict that. And that's the craziest thing about this. And that's why time will dictate this hobby. And we can do what we want, and we can do what we think is the right thing. But at the end, when everything is all said and done, time will always dictate Pokemon. And we as collectors, we as investors, are just sort of along for this weird ride. And yes, every year that goes by is just one more orbit around the sun for us. And Pokemon is just going to keep going. But it's like, Jesus. I remember like some of the real early videos I made on this channel. And I think I went out on some real big leaps of faith. Some of my earliest videos I talked about like cosmic eclipse, talked about that as being investable. And people told me reprints and everything, and that was questionable. And like when I made my first couple videos, like, Sword and Shield was out. Like base set booster boxes for $100, and Rebel Clash booster boxes were like $90. And I never would have told people to buy that stuff, because living in the now, it was stupid. But then I look back now, like I was so freaking wrong about those. Like, bought a Sword and Shield booster box 2 years ago, or not even 2 years ago. About a year ago, I started making videos, a little over a year ago. And Sword and Shield base booster boxes were $100. And I would have told you, don't buy that. And I would have like prevented people from making like 50+% gains in a year. So I don't know if I don't know. I don't know if I could ever predict the market anymore. Like, because I think about that stuff, and now that the time has gone by and the videos exist and this channel exists, and I could go back, rewatch some of those videos, and I tell people, I'm like, stay away from modern. But then modern at the time is living in the moment, with the exception of telling people to buy Cosmic Eclipse. But even then, it always came with this huge warning, and I was telling people to buy Cosmic Eclipse booster boxes at $150. $150. And I thought that like that could be the death of this channel, was to like give advice like that. And now that would have been fantastic. And like I didn't even take my own advice to that sort of level. Like, I should have just only bought Cosmic Eclipse booster box. I should have not bought literally anything else. Instead of just having a couple, I should have had like all of them. I think that is the hardest challenge. I don't know. I don't know. And I just real quick looked down at the chat, and I don't know if he's talking about what I was saying, but the old card shop said like it's okay to hold bags. It's like, are we just gonna all be bag holders in the future? Like, or are we? I don't know. And it goes back to what I said earlier in this video, is I don't know if people will look back on 2020 and they'll look at the prices during 2020 and say this stuff was still cheap. At least looking at modern real time, because that is what's cheap throughout the history of Pokemon, like at the time of release, whatever the most current product is, it's going to be at like one of its cheapest prices or pretty damn close to it. And it's just going to be kind of semantics in a sense where it, $100 booster box can the lowest be 80 or highest be 120. It's like, sure, then you're getting into like the super semantics of $20 swings for booster boxes. But, or is everybody just going to be bag holders? And is there just going to be so much freaking product given enough time that the liquidity of it just goes to freaking zero? Like the liquidity, whether you can move booster boxes or product once in a while, like the liquidity just is not there. Whether prices are sort of there, just the liquidity's not there. And like that could just come into a thing too, where it's just like, yeah, there's no liquidity, but people just won't sell it either because maybe people don't want to sell it at a loss. Like, and then it brings up questions that's like, okay, well, are people over leveraging themselves in Pokemon? Because if they're not over leveraging themselves and Pokemon is just a secondary thing and it doesn't matter if it goes to zero, then it's like, who cares? Like it could go to zero. I don't know. This is a freaking mind scratcher because I just don't know how time will dictate this hobby. And I don't think time will dictate this hobby in the same sort of trajectory that it did, previously. But who's to say that that is true? Why are we as collectors and investors, and we think about modern, and we think about it as not potentially being investable? Why are we so confident in that? And I don't know why we're so confident. I think because we're looking at the numbers and we're looking at printer capabilities and we're looking at things that we might not have really considered. And that's the craziest thing about modern product. At no point at any given moment in Pokemon history can you ever say that at the time so modern product is investable, which means if you go back to 2003, if you were living in 2003, EX Dragon is not investable. EX Ruby Sapphire is not investable. Skyridge definitely wasn't investable. Nobody even wanted Skyridge. Echo-based collectibles been on this channel at the time. It was a lot of player-based. People don't even want to touch Skyridge in 2003 because everyone thought that wasn't going to be in rotation. But then remove yourself from 2003 and throw yourself into 2009 and Platinum, Rise and Rivals, or Supreme Victors. Are those sets in 2009, are those investable? And the answer is always no in the moment. Or Diamond and Pearl. Or, go back and look at Secret Wonders. Or, I don't know. Think about like the end of Diamond and Pearl and just look at like, Plasma Storm, Plasma Freeze, Plasma Blast. Plasma Storm, you think about if you were living at the time of Plasma Storm and you looked at it that as a set, would you be like, you know what? Someday this secret rare Charizard is going to just fucking be stupid in price. Because yeah, it's the dark Charizard and like everyone loves this card. But if you were living in that moment, would you look at that card and say that this is a $3,000 to $4,000 card in less than a decade? Because this is a secret rare of the set, and some people maybe are the Blastoids fan, or I don't even remember what the third secret rare is. It's like like a trainer card. If you were looking at Plasma Storm and you had those three, you had the Charizard, you had the Blastoid, and you had that random trainer secret rare, and you looked at those and you said, this Charizard is a fucking $3,000 card. This Blastoise is a $700 card, and I don't know what that trainer sells for. But at the time, you would never have said that. I don't know. or I don't know, or go back and you just go to XY and look at Phantom Forces and look at the silver card. What is it? The Dialga. Would you pull that card at the time of XY Phantom Forces? Say, this is going to be a fucking expensive card someday. There'll be a lot of people chasing after this card. This is going to be worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars. This is going to be worth more than like a whole case of booster boxes at the time of Phantom Forces, the day Phantom Forces were released. Probably not. I don't know. This is such a hard conversation to have when you think about living in the now, trying to predict the future. Because who's to say you couldn't pull out like, but maybe we're so wrong. And maybe there's just a group of people that are right, that are just stonking out crazy hard on modern. Maybe they're the right ones. Maybe we're the wrong ones. I don't know. Yeah, that was an hour-long video. Me just fucking ranting about the future of Pokemon, because I've come to the conclusion that I just do not know what's going to happen. I have no clue. No matter how many videos I make, no matter how many things I try to ration out or try to play the what ifs or the questions or the think about this or that or new collectors or soul collectors, people sticking around or people leaving, or is any history going to repeat itself? Is modern just this new beast that is just going to have to be tamed someday? I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you guys. For all you guys that stuck around for an hour, if anybody's watching this after the fact, so Poke Collectibles said he had a question for me a while back. We'll open up for like a couple minutes worth of questions. If anybody has their questions now, write it down in the chat. But yeah, smash that like button if you like me just ranting about. I don't even know what I ranted about. Do you guys know? I don't even know. I forget what the topic of this video was. The future of Pokemon. So Gump Brave said, PK, I'd love to hear if you had any thoughts on the grading company thing I sent you. I think you were talking about like CGC handing out 10s easier, and I've already talked about that in a video. Noel Card Shop said, what is the biggest modern bag? I don't know. The biggest modern bag is anyone who paid $120 for Shine and Fates ETBs at pre-release. That is probably the biggest modern bag right now, and that was probably like one of my more stronger worded videos I've ever made on this channel, getting angry about stuff like that. So if anybody spent, crazy pre-release prices for some of this stuff that was just gonna have a crazy saturation of market, I would say that is definitely one of the biggest bag holders of modern. Is people that paid like stupid high prices during the peak. Gump Braid said a PK rant is a topic unto itself. Yeah. Let's see. My question, AP grading, is it something? I don't consider it realistic that there is no renounced grading service in Europe with European market growing. I would stay away from, especially now, the free tendies that were any graded card company, just get your card slabbed, flip it on the market, make some easy money. That is a thing of the past. When you look at like prices of CGC cards comparable to PSA cards, night and day. When you want to talk about AP graded card companies and mom and pop graded card companies and all these other, Joe Smo opened up a grading card company in my garage last week type companies. If you want to grade your cards with them, you need to look at comparables. And if you are really finding any comparables that are similar to PSA, it's just they're non-existent. So I would just stay away from anything. My advice for grading card companies would be just wait. Almost sneezed again. I didn't sneeze though. Let's see. Basic Trainer said, is it fair to say that the hobby will grow bigger every 5 years, therefore making modern scarcer based on demand because even modern will be vintage one day. Yeah, that's a great great point, basic trainer. Like today's modern could be tomorrow's vintage. And we as collectors, we as hobbyists, we as investors, or whatever we want to call ourselves this week, we are constantly making up names for, we got vintage, semi-vintage, modern, ultra modern, semi-modern, and it's just we've like made all these different names that I don't even know. It's like you can just go and like, what is vintage? Is vintage just Wizard of the Coast? Or are you like, no, vintage is Wizard of the Coast and EXS? Or then somebody else is like, no, vintage is Wizard of the Coast, EXS, Diamond and Pearl, Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Is black and white vintage? And it's like, no. But then some people be like, fuck yeah, black and white's vintage. And then they'll ask me, they'll be like, when was the last time you opened up a black and white, expansion pack from one of their sets? When was the last time you opened up a, black and white base, or, Merchant Powers, or, whatever, Dark Explorers, or Dragon Exalted, or, when was the last time you opened any of these? And I'd be like, I don't know, like a long time ago. And they'd be like, well, that's vintage. I'd be like, well, why don't you open anymore? I'd be like, because I'm not going to spend $50 on a pack of, Dragon Exalted. I'd be like, because it's a vintage pack. And I'd be like, God damn it, I guess that's kind of right. It's a tough argument to have with somebody. So when Basic says today's modern could be tomorrow's vintage, like, I guess. And are we going to get to the point where vintage just becomes anything that's out of print? Can you make that kind of? It's like, no, no, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who willing to say that. But like, truly out of print, like very, like not even just unlikely, like it's not going to get a reprint. Like black and white is not going to get a reprint. I don't know. It's interesting. Let's see what else we got. Kevin Clare said, I got my 130 ETBs. Oh, please, I hope you didn't pay 130 for Shine and Fades ETBs. Old Card Shop said, I only buy at MSRP. PK Battle Styles, 144 all day, baby. That's all right. That'll be a long time, but who knows what Battle Styles is going to do. Be interesting. It's this weird, like, separation of singles versus sealed product versus products within a set. And people might be hearing that and be like, that made no sense. It's like, no, like sometimes you'll have the booster box will be more valuable. You have the ETB be more valuable. You'll have like some random check lane blister that has an awesome promo be more valuable. You'll have like, or the singles are more valuable, which is usually the rarer thing where opening up a pack is worth more than the actual sealed product. Like an example of that for a while was like heavy expedition packs and stuff like that, where like if you pull the hollow, it was almost worth it more to grade that card than the actual pack itself, depending on what you got. And then it's like, who knows? I don't know. Thrifty TCG said, the Japanese market gives me hope that we will see $100 Battle Styles and Evolving Skies booster boxes in the near future. Yeah, that's the weird thing about Japanese market is everyone says, Japanese market is the English market, but it's just a couple months earlier. And the demand in Japan right now for a lot of products is very strong. Like I don't live in Japan, so I can't tell you like, I don't have ground on the feet there, but from what I've seen, a lot of, the demand there is strong. And I think one of the problems a lot of people are seeing here in America is that the demand in Japan is so much stronger than it is at least has been historically, that all the product that would normally trickle its way out of Japan and make it into like the English markets was just much rarer to come by for some of these newer sets. But who knows? So, Thrifty TCG could be right there where like if you want to use, the Japanese market as an indicator for Pokemon, like, yeah, Japanese market is very strong. Cheval says, talk about base set Raichu already. My drink is getting warm. So Cheval's, I bought that PSA 9 first edition on Sunday night's PWCC auction. So that was nice. So I talked about Raichu for you. I got the PSA 9. What, super undervalued in my opinion. It was a pretty shitty copy, but I do not care. A lot of whitening on the back. Let's see. Bad said, COVID era sets, aka Sword and Shield, will have great nostalgia appeal one day to all the kids who were introduced to the hobby at a time where there wasn't anything else to do. Yeah, it's this weird thing too, because a lot of the things I flock to, like when I was younger, and a lot of things I like, is a lot of that stuff is that sentimental attachment you go to it, and a lot of that sentimental attachment isn't just you going and like, buying something. A lot of it sometimes is because when you're at that very young, impressionable age, like your parents are such a big, important factor of your life. So if a lot of these kids today and a lot of your guys' kids, like anybody out there who has kids of like, 9 or 10 years old, your impression you're going to put on them for Pokemon could be drastic in the future. So when they look back on Pokemon when they're 34, 35 years old, or 30 or 29 or 28 or whatever, and they look back at Pokemon, they might not just look at Pokemon anymore as this thing they collected as a kid. They might look back at Pokemon as saying, Pokemon is something I collected with my dad or with my mom growing up. And so when they look at Pokemon, maybe it's going to have this weirder sentimental attachment than it does to like even our generation. But then even me, when I think back about Pokemon and I think about like, what is like one of the things I remember about Pokemon? Well, I remember about Pokemon is my mom driving me to Toys R Us Saturday morning so I could play in the Pokemon League. And like that is a memory I have of my mom where like Pokemon is still like embedded with this like cross generational thing. Or think about how many things you might like as a person, and the only reason you like that, or maybe some artist or some band or a movie or a TV show, and the only reason you like that is because your dad or your mom watched that, or your dad and mom took you to see this band or listen to this album in the car going to school. It was like your parents' favorite band and it became one of your favorite bands because of that. So if that is a thing where your parents or you as a parent now with Pokemon are now imprinting this memory onto your kids at this young, impressionable age, who's to say in 10, 15, 20 years from now, that impression you have now imprinted on them doesn't stick around? And that is one of the things that when they get back into Pokemon, it will be this driving factor for them, because they'll be like, yeah, I remember opening up packs with my mom and my dad, and my dad loved Pokemon. Like, maybe, who knows? I don't know. And because you're going out and you're spending all this money buying these guys packs, it's like they're going to remember that, and they're going to remember pulling a Charizard. And yes, is Charizard the most cliche card of this hobby? But yeah, probably. But the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how young you are, how old you are. Everybody likes pulling Charizards. Whether or not you're even a Charizard fan, you can fucking hate Charizard for all I care. But you're still going to want to pull Charizards. It's that weird thing. Yeah. Let's see. But yeah. Anyways, guys, went on for hour 18 minutes of just nonstop ranting. I think I'm pretty good at ranting now. Do me a favor. Hit that like button. Joe, I see you in the chat. Dell, I see you in the chat. Alex, Mixmaster, Kevin, I see you guys. Quad Shot, hit that like button. How come you haven't hit the like button yet? I see Echo Base Collectibles in the chat. Hit that like button. No, seriously, guys. I appreciate all you guys being here. And Rattle Pokemon, it's in the chat. Rattle, don't forget to hit that like button. But no, all you guys are great. I love talking Pokemon. This is fun. And if anybody wants to come on, I'm always looking for somebody else to chat Pokemon with. Shoot me a DM on Instagram if you ever want to just chat some Pokemon. I'm always up for it. You don't have to have a big channel or anything. Just be passionate about this hobby. But to everybody else out there, I'll catch you on the next video.